So
Yeah.
I always do tons of grounding meditations with my clients. I do grounding meditations myself. I use words to shift my state of consciousness. I have a power affirmation. I have people that I put on very specific power affirmations. These are all ways, people are like, well, it's not actually happening. No, no, no. Visualization
Mhm.
changes our biochemistry. Is that right? That's
Absolutely,
right. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think just like our thoughts can impact the production of neurotransmitters
That's
in our
right.
brain, like getting dopamine and serotonin and
Yeah.
oxytocin. And we have so much, we have this incredible ability to stimulate these neurotransmitters at any time just by redirecting our attention.
That's right.
And
Ooh,
it's so powerful.
yeah, I mean, we are so aligned on everything that you
Mhm.
say. I mean, you basically have gone about the business of scientifically validating everything I believe and love,
Mhm.
which is that, you know, you do not have to be at the mercy of where you came from. You can change simply by using very, very easy, not complicated. In fact, you say that you will encourage your brain to be lit. For example, if you want to go out and do a walk every day, put your running shoes at the door to have less of an obstacle to do it. Make your life so that you are less going to have, what is it, activation?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So what happened was, I forget what if it was like in college or high school or something like that, but I learned this term activation energy in the context of chemistry. And so
Right.
the way that it's taught is that, let's say for example you have like a glass beaker and you put two different molecules into water and you start to heat that water, and what happens is that the molecules start to kind of move around a little bit. And then you add more heat, and now they're really starting to move around. And then you add more heat, and eventually they just bombard and they create a new entity, right? A compound. They bind
Wow.
together. And the amount of energy that you put into the system is called the activation energy, the
Right.
amount of energy to cause a reaction to occur.
Uh-huh.
And so when I learned that, I was like, oh my God, I could apply that to every area of my life, especially the things that I'm trying to do.
Right.
So, for example, last summer, my friend Michael Gale called me when he was on his bike and he said, being on my bike is my happy place. And I immediately connected with that because I've always had this wonderful time being on a bike, like just
Yeah.
feel like free as a
Freedom.
bird,
Yeah.
and the wind and just the scenery, and just my thoughts are, and I'm moving, so the
Yeah.
neurotransmitters,
Yeah.
it's like an incredible, it's like just getting high off of life, really.
That's
I
right.
feel like being on a bike. And so that, but then I was like, wait a moment, why am I not biking? Because I have a bike at home.
Right.
And so what I did is I said, okay, if I decide to go home today and ride my bike, that's a lot of activation energy because I haven't ridden it in a year or two.
Okay.
And I said, okay, well, what could I do to reduce the activation
Mhm.
energy so I'm more likely to get that
To do
reaction
it.
to actually go and do it?
Yeah.
And so what I did is so one day I just cleaned up my bike. I didn't let myself do anything else. I just was like, I'm just going to
Focused on
clean
the
it,
bike. Yeah.
just the bike, clean it up. Then the next day I put air in the tires.
Right.
Didn't let myself do anything else, just step by step, right?
Good for you. Yeah.
Reducing the activation energy. And then the next day, I hung my helmet on the handlebars and I put the bike where I would walk by it every single day. So
Oh.
now the only energy I needed to put into the system to get on the bike was finding 10 or 15 minutes to go for a couple loops around the neighborhood. And last summer, I biked over 1,000 miles.
Wow.
Yes, yeah.
Simply by
In these
reducing
pants, in these jeans.
but simply by reducing
Yeah,
what you're saying is activation, what I'm calling it, the obstacles to actually
yeah,
following through.
yeah, yeah.
And simple but profound.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Because
just,
people are trying to, walk the 12,000 steps. They're trying to eat in different ways, think in different ways, and then there's these different activations as well. I can't do that because if I do that, that means I'm going to be considered to be selfish. I was taught, these type of notions. So
mm,
people need to sort of find ways to lessen the obstacles to activate, not to activate, but to actually accomplish doing what it is they're setting out for themselves, so they can actually affect change in their lives.
yeah, yeah. And I think a big part of
And
it,
that light from the lit brain, I think, from what you're
yes,
saying.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, to me, I think a big thing is finding a process that works for you, and what you may observe in others processes may work for them, but it may not work for you.
Right.
So you might, for example, you might get in, you might be like, okay, I want to walk 10,000 steps.
Right.
And you go and do that and you're just not feeling it. But maybe there's other possibilities. Like maybe if you were to drive to a nearby park and, find a forest, that would completely change it. Or maybe drive to a waterfront, or drive to, some people
But
may
be authentic.
Yeah.
Find your truth is what I hear you saying. Like, find what works for you. And that requires that you investigate.
Yes.
That requires that you decide to go on a journey within, that it's not the other person's journey, it's your own. But again, a life that is not examined, you're not going to actually be able to change anything if you don't examine what actually truly is authentic to you.
Yeah.
Which is why I so relate to your work, because, find your self culture. That's my whole thing. It's like, find out who you are, but have the courage to dig and actually investigate who you are.
Yeah.
Be courageous in that regard.
100%. I mean, you might like walking around a mall. That's fine.
Yeah,
you might
that's
like
fine.
walking
Exactly.
down the most busy street in your city where all the shops and stuff are, but kind of finding the place where you just, because I feel when you start experimenting, then you're more open to the cues.
Right.
And you're more open to like which environments flood your brain with the most positive neurotransmitters. And once you start connecting with where you feel the greatest, the best, then you align with that. And it creates this domino effect in your life.
Amazing. I'm going to ask a couple of questions here. In your title, you refer to nature as a playbook for triggering energy, ideas, and action. How does nature help inspire us?
Wow. Well, there's a lot. Okay, so where I'll start really here is when I was younger, when I was in the 3rd grade, we moved out. My family moved out to the country, and we're talking really out in the country. There was a sheep farm beside us, buffalo farm across the road, farmer's field in my backyard. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, there'd be a pack of wolves on the front lawn. It happened many times, going over to the sheep farm. We had a creek that ran across. Our driveway was 1,000 feet long. We called it a laneway. And there was a creek, there were snapping turtles and crayfish, and it was wild. And I was struggling with undiagnosed ADHD and learning differences. So I'd get off the bus, because I'd have to be bused because it was in the country. And, I'd be really exhausted and frustrated, ruminating on a lot of things when I got off the bus. But as I walked, along this driveway carved through a forest, I just remember, it was before there were cell phones or any other sort of distractions like that. And so I just remember looking at the trees, and I can like see it right now, and the animals, and just feeling all of a sudden this sense of solace, this calmness. And so I started to develop this deep connection and awareness of how, what I was experiencing in nature. And it allowed me to kind of almost have this like portal for thinking about nature and reflecting on it. And I started to realize that nature really has no end goal. Nature is really all about evolution and learning and experimentation and adaptation. And as I start reflecting on our lives as humans, we set these goals we have these expectations that these things are going to happen. But I almost feel like in nature, the expectation is that things will just progress and evolve and adapt and learn and more experiment. Like there's no expectation for something at the end to happen.
Can I ask you then, are you saying that if we develop more of a way of looking at life that's more like that, just be in the experience of it, be more appreciating the moment? Is that what you're talking? Not so much end goal, but just the evolution. You're gonna get there. Trust that life is taking you on a journey that you're learning and experimenting and seeing. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it's exactly it. It's like what I've realized, for example, is that I think when we create goals for ourselves, we set expectations, and then it also creates fear and anxiety because we don't always hit the expectations. We don't always hit the goals that we set for ourselves. And then that builds anxiety and fear. And what I realized though is that because in nature there's no end goal, it's just this evolution, this adaptation, this
Cyclical,
learning,
yeah.
this like experimentation. It's almost like if we set the goal for us to be to learn something, to gain an insight versus to hit some sort of, tangible thing. Like,
And
I'll give you an example. Like, I was invited to give a lecture, a talk at Stanford
yeah,
on the book.
yeah,
And I had never given a lecture on the book before. And so I used all the skills I could and put, everything together, and you put this lecture together. And I went there, and I did the best I possibly could in the time that I had, and I feel like it was okay. It wasn't what I really wanted it to be,
okay,
but it was kind of okay. And instead of sort of shaming myself, which is kind of the old version of myself, to be
right,
like, oh, why didn't you do this, why didn't you do
right.
that, what I did is I said to myself, this is version 1.0,
This is
right?
wonderful.
And there's going to be a version 5, and there's going to be a version 10 and 15 and 20. And by thinking about it, kind of reframing it like that,
Yes,
I was able to connect with the audience.
yes.
And my mission was to see what parts of this talk are they connecting with and what parts are they not. And so then by sort of tuning into that, I have very specific things to work on and to evolve this talk, which is very exciting because I know the next time I give it, I'm going to more deeply connect with the audience,
I love
and
this.
it's going to be better. And then the next time it'll be better. And so
I love it.
sort of like thinking that nature is really the playbook,
Right,
for how we approach
that
life.
way. I a lot of the time as a psychotherapist, I'm having people doing somatic journeying within themselves to analyze their patterns, their childhood, whatever it is. And the attitude I ask them to develop is an attitude of curious, neutral observer. Just like you're just observing, you're curious, and you talk a lot about curiosity as a way to develop a lit up brain. Talk more on that if you could. Curiosity.
Yeah. I think curiosity. So I think, even so, if we step back, I really feel there's this life force that is within all of us, with, kind of throughout the cosmos. And I think that curiosity is a big part of the life force.
Wow.
I think other things that are part of it are, creativity, love. I think, there's multiple components that make up this force. And I think that we are all born super curious about the world.
Right.
And yet, one of the most watched TED Talks of all time is by this guy, Ken Robinson, who talks about how the education system educates children out of being curious.